name is Dr. Lizzie Burns, and I've been working on a collection of drawings all about viruses and vaccines. So, this first activity that we've got, I have been drawing lots of different types of viruses, and viruses are so tiny, you can only see them under a different sort of microscope, and you only get really fuzzy pictures. But I've drawn these to scale, and they are so tiny. So, viruses would be around 1,000 would fit across the width of one of your hairs. So it's really, really small. And I have started colouring them in, and I would encourage you to get out those colouring pencils, get colouring in. And in a second, I'm going to be asking a virologist, Dr. Chloe Myers, questions about these different viruses and diseases. So yeah, get creative. There is no right or wrong colour. They are so tiny, they have no colour. So it means you can use whatever colours you want. So we'd love to see some really creative pictures. So Chloe, I wonder whether you can, I've started colouring in. I think it's smallpox. I don't really hear much about smallpox anymore. I've heard maybe it's extinct. Is this true?
Yes, smallpox is definitely one of the success stories. So thank you for inviting me along today to have a chat.
Pleasure.
So smallpox is one of the bigger of the viruses. As you can see, they're all different shapes and sizes. And so smallpox has been a massive success story thanks to vaccination. And that's where it all started in terms of the first vaccine that ever came about many years ago. And it was actually by somebody called Edward Jenner, who observed that milkmaids, as they were sort of exposed to a similar virus that's related to smallpox called cowpox. So when they were exposed to this virus regularly, they noticed if they were then subsequently exposed to smallpox, they didn't get smallpox. And smallpox is a really nasty infection. So before we had a vaccine, about sort of 3 in every 10 people would die as a result of it. So it was a really nasty infection to have. But thankfully, as a result of vaccination, since 1980, it's been completely eradicated, which is, excellent news.
Yeah, I mean, I did have I don't recommend it, but I did have a look at people with smallpox. It looks absolutely horrendous. Poor people. I mean, so much suffering, and how extraordinary that science has managed to get rid of such a horrible, horrible disease.
Definitely.
So I started colouring in another virus. I know we've been hearing an awful lot about this, the coronavirus. Do you think with vaccines we can make coronavirus extinct? Is that a possibility?
So it very much depends on the virus. So, and unfortunately, because of the nature of coronaviruses, it's unlikely that we'll ever be able to completely eradicate it, because depending on the type of viruses, they have abilities to change what's on their surface and change how we as individuals recognize that virus. And because they are sort of changing all the time, it's very difficult to completely eradicate them. However, now we've over the years developed these vaccines, and technology is improving all the time, and once again we have got several vaccines on the market now available against coronavirus. So now these are in place. They can be tweaked and changed as the virus changes. So it might be that every year we have to have another vaccine to improve our body's response to that virus.
So that's a bit like the flu virus.
Just like the flu virus. Yeah, exactly.
Excellent. And so why do they all look so different? I mean, I'm really struck by Ebola. It's like a massive snake coming through here.
Yeah.
Why do viruses look so different? Or
yeah, so that's a difficult question to answer because they are all different shapes and sizes. They've all sort of evolved over the years in different ways, and just like all organisms on the planet, are different shapes and sizes. And it's just down to where they originate from, what they infect. So viruses are very specialized in that they've adapted to infect specific cells and specific organisms, and they've done that by changing their shape and structure. And so by being different shapes, it means that they can successfully cause different types of infections. And that's how they've become all the different varieties that they are
Pretty,
today.
aren't they?
They are pretty, yes, yeah.
They're
I
like
think
little
everybody else
jewels.
agrees.
Oh, and I guess I'm thinking of this as a question. I'm thinking particularly in a school, this would be the kind of question that'd be asked: which disease here is the worst?
Yeah, yeah, that's another difficult question to answer,
Mm.
because we've got a huge variety of viruses there. So it's quite difficult to classify which one's the worst, and you could look at different things as to why you wanted to decide what was the worst virus. So if you thought about what's the worst in terms of the disease that they cause, I'd probably say that Ebola is probably the worst, because unfortunately most people, so again, we're quite fortunate in that there are some vaccines that are becoming available for Ebola now, but it causes a very nasty disease. Quite often you get sort of fever, muscle pain, headaches, diarrhea and vomiting. You can get rash and sort of bleeding, which then causes problems with your organs. And as a result of that, sort of 50%, approximately 50% would end up, so half the people that would get it would quite often die. So in terms of if I was to catch a virus, yeah, I'd probably be least keen to
No, not this one.
Ebola. Not that one, no. And then other things to consider are how they change. So as we're sort of learning today, particularly with coronavirus, and that's been the problem also with influenza over the years as well, is how they change over time. So there are some viruses like influenza and coronavirus that can change quite dramatically. Not, thankfully it doesn't happen very often, but when it does happen, because it creates essentially a new type of virus that none of us have seen before, that's why it
That's
manages
what
to
causes the
spread.
problems.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I
that's
guess
why
the
it's
more virus there is, the more chance of that happening. Hence, we need to get those rates down.
definitely, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, and just one last question: do all viruses make us unwell?
No, definitely not. So in fact, all living organisms are infected by viruses all the time, and we've sort of evolved with viruses over numbers of years. And I guess to give you an example of some viruses that we can think about, if we think about the herpes viruses, so those include viruses that cause things like chicken pox and cold sores. So sometimes when people get these viruses, they don't cause any symptoms at all. Sometimes they might initially, but then they actually stay within us for the rest of our lifetime, and we're able to, live normal lives and function. And you would never know that you're infected with these viruses, because that's how they've become so successful, because they're able to continue,
Not harming you.
not
Yeah,
harm you. You're not fighting it, they're not fighting you, and it's just able to
living together in
continue
harmony.
living together in harmony. Exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Are they ever used? Sorry, one last question. I know I said one last question, but I'm really intrigued now. Are there any viruses that are actually useful, that have done us good?
Yeah. So we can, and again, another really recent example of that is if we think about coronavirus. So one of the new vaccines that we have against that uses another virus called adenovirus. And what they do is they've changed the information that's contained within that virus, so that it's not able to replicate uncontrollably. And what they do is they've put sort of instructions within that virus, so that when that virus goes into our body and infects a cell, it shows the coronavirus sort of spikes on our cells, so that we can produce antibodies against that
Wow.
infection. So that's one way that viruses can be used
Yes.
in a
So we're
good
kind of
way
using it to help us. So
yeah,
viruses really can be our friend.
they can be our friend. Yeah.
Thank you, Chloe. That's fantastic.
That's
I hope
okay.
you've been enjoying colouring them in. I think this will take you quite a while. So I hope you're enjoying that. Thank you.